Moss Media.
Welcome to the Independent Voter Podcast from Independent Voter Project. We're going to expand a little bit. A new era of independent voter news that the journalists just don't cover, where we have these debates on a national level, really taking on issues so that people have more educated disagreements with each other. Let's just explain how the process really works.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Independent Voter Podcast. I'm joined again by my friend on the East Coast, Cara McCormick. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world of independent voters. There's some big gerrymandering initiatives, especially out here in California. And then we had the big governor's race in California that there was kind of a statement made by the candidate currently in the lead that's caused a kerfuffle, right? Cara, it's probably pretty indicative of the way elections and stuff are being run now, but at least it's gotten some attention. You want to talk about that for a little bit?
Sure. It's great to see you. Hope you're enjoying beautiful Brazil. It's raining today in Maine, but we've had a really nice fall, and with the fall, it's definitely campaign season. And yeah, let's talk a little bit about the governor's race in California and Katie Porter, and then, why we should have top 5 elections in California instead of top 2. The big news this week in the California governor's race is that Tony Atkins got out of the race and Ian Calderon got into the race. And there's a clip that's going viral this morning, like all over the political news, that involves a CBS News reporter, Katie Porter. Her name is Julie Watts, is the CBS News reporter. And she asked Katie Porter on camera yesterday, what would you say to the 40% of California voters, that's 6.1 million California voters who voted for Donald Trump, that, the reporter said, you will need those in order to win the campaign. And Porter sort of reacted in a really interesting way. She said, how would I need them in order to win, ma'am? And then later in the interview, Watts asked Porter, what would happen if another Democrat emerged and was in that top 2, and, as opposed to a Republican or an independent? And she said, I do not intend for that to be the case. And more, she just got more and more frustrated. And then she just said, I don't want to do this interview anymore. I'm going to call it. And I don't want all of this on camera. And so, anytime a politician reacts that way on camera, it's going to get a lot of press. So yeah. Let's talk about it.
Well, yeah. So for those listening, right, it might be odd, like top 2 California. What do you mean another Democrat, right? California, like Washington, is unique in that we have nonpartisan primaries, where really what that means is it's a single ballot. The party labels of the candidates and the voters don't matter. It's not a Republican primary or a Democratic primary. It's just the top 2 candidates go on. It could be a Republican Democrat, could be 2 Democrats, could be 2 Republicans, right? So what was fascinating was when Katie, when they get asked, well, what would happen, right? What are you going to say to those 40% of the voters? Now, there's 2 things that I think that are interesting about that. I think elected officials, especially at a level of governor, at least pretend that they say that they're going to represent everybody, right? But Katie Porter just bases it, why would I need to represent them? 1, that was just an interesting statement. But 2, then she couldn't answer the question, in that there's been a lot of pushback against top 2, which does have its own flaws, that like, well, what if you get 2 Democrats in an election, or 2 Republicans? Now the Democrats have nobody to vote for. Now the Republicans have nobody to vote for. Well, Katie's answer or non-answer is really testimony. Well, there's a good argument to be made that actually Republicans are given the power if 2 Democrats advance in the California primary, right? Because Katie recognizes if it's her versus a Republican, she wins because the state is overwhelmingly Democrat. If it's her against a Democrat, there's the point of the reporter's question. How are you going to reach out to those Republicans? Because now you do need those votes. You have 2 Democrats, and you guys need to compete for those Republican votes, or you're not going to get them. So this is something I think that is way undercovered in the national and the more partisan press, is that there's a very strong argument to be made that when you have two Democrats running face to face, it's actually the only time in California when the Republican votes on a statewide basis really, really matter, and the candidates have to be responsive to them. So I don't know if you got a different take on it,
I mean,
Cara.
I just don't understand why any candidate would ever say that they weren't going to go after every single vote. It doesn't matter that this slicing and dicing of the electorate. It's not like the way forward for consensus building for candidates that represent the broadest number of people possible. And this definitely points out to me the reason why we need to expand California's system from a top 2 system to a top 5 system with ranked choice voting in the general election. Californians are super lucky that they have an open primary. I always write that in any story I write about top 2 in California. I say, the Californians are so lucky to not have a first past the post system and to have this open primary where everybody can compete kind of on a level playing field in a primary. It's wonderful. Now it just needs to be adapted so that it can avoid some of the things that Katie Porter sort of alluding to here. Have 5 people move forward to the general election, allow voters to be able to rank them in order of preference, and have the candidate who has the broadest consensus of all Californians be able to win that general election, instead of
Yeah.
this slicing and dicing mentality where somebody says, I don't need the Republicans to agree with me. I don't need the Republicans to vote for me. Why wouldn't you want the Republicans to agree with you and vote for you? Why wouldn't you put forward plans that appeal to a broad majority of Californians instead of just slicing off your little piece?
Because that's the way on a national level, that's really how elections are run. You look at closed primary states with super low turnouts, you really do only need 5% of the electorate to actually win. You get that 5% in your primary. The district's gerrymandered, so the opposing party really has no shot to win, and you get into office by representing, this little sliver of the electorate. But to your point is, we've been talking about a top 4, top 5 kind of model. Alaska actually adopted it, and it's driven the partisans crazy on both sides of the aisle because of the folks that end up getting elected is, representing an organization like IVP who did top 2. I mean, we got pushback from both parties and all the third parties and everybody else. Well, now you're making it only 2 choices. I say, well, to Cara's point, actually, the next step IVP's put on the table is, we should open it up to 4 or 5. And that would have multiple things. Right now, there's so much attention focused on a June primary when turnout's about half of what it's going to be in the general election in November. And that really determines the candidate field that everybody else is going to vote for. When you narrow the candidate base to 2, especially in a statewide race like this, it's almost a fluke which candidate, depending on the number of Republicans or the number of Democrats. And, there's things that are outside that are totally unrelated to the quality of the candidates that determine which 2 go in. And as we witnessed by Katie Porter's non-answer, right, those 2 could have substantial effect on the ultimate outcome of the race. So those of us who have been now advocating for, moving to top 4, top 5, there's really 2 components of it. Is one is like, okay, prove your viability in the primary. Okay, get in that top 5, prove you can get a big enough base and everything. But let's run the real election in November. And okay, to be a governor for the entire state of California, make it so you can't just say, 40% of the electorate, I don't even need them. I'm not even going to talk to them, right? Because under a top 4, top 5 system, you couldn't win by it like that. And I think that goes back to, what is your theory of government? Should we have representatives and governors and everybody that are out there championing their party? Or should we have representatives and governors and folks that are out there to say, I'm championing the people I represent?
It's so interesting because it's like, think about what Katie Porter is saying when she says, I don't intend for that to be the case, to have it be 2 Democrats. Like, so here's a Democrat who you think would want the top 2 to both be Democrats, right?
Well, no, I mean, look at Adam Schiff when he ran for Senate. He
didn't want it either, right? But this is crazy. They'd rather have either them
ads
or a Republican. Like, it's very, it's sort of almost selfish in a way,
Well, of course
right?
it is. She's going to spend, right? So she will likely spend money to promote the top Republican because she knows that's an easier Republican defeat in the general. That's exactly what Adam Schiff did when he spent ads promoting Steve Garvey for the U.S. Senate race, knowing if Steve Garvey got into the general election, it was an easy walk through, right? And this
Yep.
goes back to the whole gerrymandering debate where you have the governor of California, right? And I'm going to sugarcoat it. Like, I understand why some people are taking the, yes on 50 and doing the gerrymandering because it's a reaction to Trump and everything. But if you step back and go, gerrymandering didn't start with the Republicans in Texas. I mean, Democrats have been doing it. Republicans have been doing it, right? It's a very partisan based view of the world, right? And
And the
Newsom,
courts have said that that's okay.
right.
The
And
courts
Newsom,
continually say it's okay for the politicians to
right
gerrymander.
now, that's where it stands, right? But everybody in California politics, if you get them in a private room, are going to say the truth. Would Newsom be doing this if he wasn't running for president?
I mean, I've been watching the federalization of the National Guard in Illinois and in California by the President of the United States, who's basically taking the National Guard and putting them under his control. And of course, it's Newsom and Pritzker who are going
Mhm.
to be candidates for president in 2028. And so we're seeing these battles on a national stage, and maybe, it looks like it's about one thing, but maybe it's about something else altogether
Right.
behind
But it's, yeah,
behind the scenes.
partisan
Um,
political positioning, right? Like, yes, there needs to be enforcement of getting, bad criminals out. And no, we don't want an over abuse of the, authoritarian is the term they've been, turning around. It's like, but both,
Look, Chad, I mean, it's
everybody's,
hard not to say authoritarianism when you've got like Black Hawk helicopters
well, yeah,
and people rappelling down into Chicago apartment buildings in the middle of the night. It's definitely an interesting time to
it
be
is,
alive in this country and to be
right?
politically active.
But it's all partisan political positioning, right? We're the law and order, and we're the non-authoritarian. That's where the debate is at right now, right? But
Just one more thing that I wanted to bring up is when you were talking about like the candidate Schiff running ads for Garvey.
mhm.
That is the genesis of how I got involved with ranked choice voting. So way back in 2012 in Maine, I was working for Angus King, who was an independent running for United States Senate for the first time. He had been our governor, but he was running for Senate. And so he was running as an independent. And then there was a Democrat who was running. And then there was a Republican who was running. And the Republicans started running ads on TV that praised the Democrat to try to peel off support from Angus, who was the independent. And I mean, they were putting money behind it and they were saying all these really nice things about the Democrat, the Republicans. And I just thought, like, what in the world is going on in
Well,
our politics? And how can we change the incentives so that we can stop this total madness, this manipulation of people for, partisan partisan gains? So anyway, now we have a
well,
lot to talk about, right?
well, there is, and we don't have a ton of time. Just run through some from IVP's perspective. I mean, something big in our world. Independent voter projects kind of tackle the heart of it. What we think is the heart of this problem, right, is the partisan primary system. And you have organizations like Open Primaries and Unite America and others that have been focused on this issue. But it's our belief that it's the partisan primary system, like on a national level, right, that has incentivized this early division of the electorate, right? Candidates, for you to win, you have to appeal to this narrow partisan base and get through the primary. And then, as we're seeing with the elevated gerrymandering stuff going on in every state, it's increasingly becomes, well, the party primary is the only thing that really matters because the districts are all gerrymandered. So whoever's in the majority controlled district, you win in the primary. So about 15 years ago, IVP started our legal strategy and filed our first lawsuit in New Jersey. It simply said, look, closed primaries are unconstitutional. In New Jersey, 50% of voters, 50%, have taken the active step of registering to vote, but saying, I don't want to be a part of a party. So in that state, because they have closed primaries, they're legally prohibited from voting in the first stage that is determinative of the winner in pretty much 100% of the cases, because our argument is they exercised their First Amendment right not to join an organization they didn't want to be a part of. So most simply, the argument is, look, this is a public election process, just like the white primaries cases and in Gray v. Sanders, the court said when there's an integral stage of the election process, it's just as important as the general election. IVP said, okay, well, how can you exclude anybody from an important stage of the election by exercising one of their fundamental rights? So we filed another case, ironically, in California, which still has a semi-closed presidential primary. And then about a year ago, a retired attorney all by himself in Florida goes and files the similar case against Florida's closed primary system. So
My hero.
yeah, Michael Polil, who I get to talk to in about a week, right? And so he takes that and he files his writ to the Supreme Court. And, we talked to open primaries, and the Ford Party reached out and said, hey, let's all file an amicus brief in support of it. Now, the exciting news is about a week ago, we got a notice from the court that the case is going to be on the discussion list for October.
Amazing.
That's a big deal. I didn't even realize what a big deal it was. So basically, 98% of cases or so are just, you file them, but they're never discussed. So we made it
by
to
the justices.
by
is
the
what you're
justices,
saying, right?
that very small stack that's going to be go to them, and they're going to discuss the issue. And what IVP tried to articulate in the amicus was that this is at the core of the issue, why you're seeing all the fights on gerrymandering, why you see the Texas Republican Party right now is suing to close the Texas open primary, which the Democrats in Hawaii tried to do a few years ago, right? It doesn't matter. It's not a partisan issue. The party in control wants to close the primaries in their state because it's easier for them to continue to control it, right? So the seminal case was California Democratic Party v. Jones invalidated California's old open primaries. Now, the case was California Democratic Party v. Jones. The attorney that argued the case of the Supreme Court was the Republican Party's attorney. So they were in the court together sharing attorneys to close primaries, right? So at its core, we're very excited. This would be a huge case. We don't want to get over our skis, and the reality, will the court pick it up? There's a bunch of other cases that, are talked about more nationally, but the Supreme Court brought up this case. It would fundamentally upend elections all over the place, because it would essentially say, no, states, you can't have this first round of a process and exclude voters, which are now, 30-40% of the electorate, just because they don't want to join one of the two parties. So that's some big news. And then Cara,
yeah, congratulations on that. Congratulations to our friend in Florida who proves, once again that one person with a lot of persistence and discipline and creativity and fearlessness can take a case all the way to the Supreme Court all by himself in retirement, and could potentially make a huge difference in the history of independent voting and independent voters in our whole country. So we still live in a great country, even if
it's a great story. He's a retired attorney. I got to talk to Michael, a little bit, and I asked him, why do you do this? He's a retired attorney, and he goes, well, I was just thinking it was really unfair. I'm retired, and it was either write a book or file this lawsuit. So I filed a lawsuit. He's representing himself. He's the plaintiff. He's the attorney, right? But he's retired, and he goes, and I reached out to all these organizations that I thought would, the ACLU and everybody else that, are supposed to protect civil liberties, and, silence. None of them would touch the case. And I go, well, welcome to the independent world.
Welcome to the world of reform politics, where, you think that your friends are your friends, but then it turns out that they're actually the ones that are the hardest to overcome, because everybody has their own agendas. And it's pretty cool when one person kind of steps in and, despite only has the agenda that he had, right? So he's
Yeah,
not
the
being
agenda
paid
was
by
I'm either going to
anybody
write a
else.
book or I'm going to do this lawsuit because I'm
Yeah,
tired and I want to do something worthwhile. And so it's a
yeah.
great story. If the court picks it up, it's going to be, you know, then I hope the national media has to pay attention and go, holy crap, this could be big, but then, reality is maybe this is the next step. We got an oral argument on our case in the Third Circuit. We've filed writs twice, Now this case as an aggregate is getting a discussion in the Supreme Court. This is, look at the gay rights cases. Those took 30, 40 years. How many cases and how many writs and how many right things until it got to the Supreme Court. Frankly, if it got pulled up at this would be a rapid development
Very
of
much.
15 years. So trying to be realistic about it, but also optimistic. And I think the political conditions of today have kind of probably elevated the importance in the court's eyes of, well, crap, maybe we do need to take up this issue sooner rather than later because it's getting out of control.
Yep. Yep. I totally agree with you. It's a big week at the Supreme Court. It's opening its term. Everybody's watching. One of the cases that I think is really interesting is they're going to consider this Illinois mail-in balloting lawsuit. It's a challenge. The Republicans have challenged tons of rules around mail-in balloting. And what they're saying in this case is basically, does a federal elected official, can that person sue to stop a state from counting ballots that come in after the election? So I was just looking at our voter guide, Independent Voter News, and everybody needs to check out the Independent Voter News voter guide on Prop 50. Just to let you know, the election is on November 4th, but in California, the ballots are landing in people's boxes right now. The drop boxes are open, and you have to mail your ballot in by the 4th of November, according to the rules in California, but they'll count it if it gets there by November to the 12th. And so in the Supreme Court lawsuit that's being looked at today, they're asking, can a candidate challenge that? So can a candidate challenge a state law that says if a ballot doesn't get there till November the 12th, even if it's the law, the state shouldn't have to count it because that's sort of not fair, these ballots coming in, even if they're postmarked by the date. So it'll be interesting to see, the Supreme Court, interestingly, is going to get involved on this very granular issue. But if you just look at the lawsuit filed by Stephen in Florida, it's so much more important than, whether or not a ballot should be, by when a ballot should be received.
Right. But I think, importance, right? Importance within the context of the fight between the Republicans and Democrats, right?
Correct.
That issue on when our ballots counted is important, right? And then there's all kinds of tangential issues related to that, is that, states like California have literally legalized ballot harvesting, right? So,
That's right.
you don't have to go all the way and say, oh, our elections don't mean anything and they're totally rigged. But, there's a reason why ballot harvesting is illegal in many places in many countries across the world, because there's room for impropriety, right? And those are the conversations we have. So but general issues, though, are, fights between the two parties that kind of that determine their balance of power with each other. I think your point about this being a broader issue, we believe this is a broader issue on our case, is it's a fundamental change to the system where it's not that the Democrats are gonna get better or improved because of it, or the Republicans. And frankly, I don't think either of them get hurt from it. It fundamentally restructures it and says, no, you don't get to be representatives or win offices by building up your base and turning them out and being the most, having more voters of a party in a given district, right? You win districts by representing the most number of all voters in a district, right? Which is just a fundamentally different approach to government, right?
And you would never have the Democrats or the Republicans bring such a case, right?
No, in fact, they've brought all the cases that set up, right? Okay, why is the Independent Voter Project and Michael Polil the ones fighting this in the courtroom in the first place? I mean, we're a relatively modestly funded organization. Michael Polil is a retired attorney, right, with doing it on his own, because over the years, there's really two, forgive the pun, parties in the courtroom. There's the state, right? Because it's the
Right.
state's election process. And then the folks arguing that have the resources and the interest in arguing cases are the political parties. So it's always through the lens of the political parties that they're arguing these cases, right? So the closest challenges that we've had in the court are, if you take like the Nader case out of Connecticut, and it was in the late 70s, you had a independent voter who said, I want to vote in the Republican Party, in the Republican Party's presidential primary. Right. So the courts, and the parties, as interested parties in this case, assert their right and say, no, it's our primary. Okay. You need to defend our right to that primary. All the case law is built up around that point of view. Our argument is fundamentally different. It's for the first time an individual voter saying, we don't want access to the Democratic Party's primary or the Republican Party's primary. We want access to the state's election process. The state created an election process that is fundamentally unequal, and we deserve a right to that. So the answer that we're asked, that's why we're saying this is right for the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court and lower courts have only answered the question, does a party have to allow an independent voter in or out? They've never asked the question, what's the state's obligation? Now, can the state create a process that excludes non-members? So sorry for my Cara, but
I guess I have a question. I know we're in the weeds a little bit, but if I can organize my own political party in the state of Maine, say, and then have my own primary, I would be able to have access that way. But that's it, right? I mean, well, in Maine now we have what's called a semi-open primary, which is, you can go to the primary and you can say, I want a Republican ballot or I want a Democratic ballot, depending on, as long as you're not registered. So it's
right.
like this funny little compromise that we came up with.
Yeah, and there's all different shades and stuff. Colorado's something very similar, right? And this is all because there is no clear precedent of law, right? There's this clear conflict in the Supreme Court where they say, look, Texas is trying to argue this side of the conflict right now, saying we can't have open primaries. Those primaries belong to us, right? And then you have the voters' perspective of people defending, like there's lawsuits challenged against Colorado's semi-open and Maine's semi-open, saying, well, if they belong to them, you can't have a semi-open primary. It's how they invalidated the blanket open primary in California, because there's the conflict between rights. There's the political party's rights, and then there's the individual voters' rights.
That's why the Supreme Court, right?
And that's as simply as what our argument to the Supreme Court is. The state created the conflict, and guess what? The state doesn't have to create the conflict. It's not the court's job or anybody else's job to say independent voters win the conflict or parties win the conflict. Don't create the conflict, right? And you can do that in many ways. You could have nonpartisan primaries. Cara, one of the things that we've discussed, and we have everybody from folks from Fair Vote, folks from Unite America, others have also started to talk about a little more, is the idea of, why don't you just have an other primary, right? Let the Democrats, let the Republicans have their primary. But a state like New Jersey, where there's more independent voters than Republicans and Democrats combined. So why not have a primary for all of them where they can elect a nominee, right?
I mean, yes, you could do that, but I still just keep coming back to that top 5 is the smartest way to go. You can have the best of both worlds. You have an open primary, you have 5 persons go through. You're going to have a Democrat in there, you're going to have a Republican in there, you'll have an independent, maybe you'll have a green, who knows, but you'll have 5 people go forward. And then you just rank the choices first through 5th, just how they're doing it in Alaska, but with one more. That gets rid of all these problems.
Yeah. I mean, people ask all the time, well, what's your remedy? What do you say? I'm telling the court they have to do. I said, the remedy, there's lots of them. I mean, there's dozens of election reform organizations that will argue their hearts out about their system is better than this and that. As long as it meets the fundamental principle that the party rights are respected and the voter rights are respected, then the state should be able to implement them. But right
And
now,
in California, with top two, the party rights are respected. And in Alaska, isn't that right, Chad? I mean, in Alaska,
yes,
are the party rights are respected.
right.
So
And it might come to surprise of where the legal opinion was that kind of originated this idea was in the California Democratic Party v. Jones lawsuit. It was a concurring opinion by then Justice Scalia, who said if California wanted to have a system where everybody had the right to vote, they should simply adopt a nonpartisan primary.
fascinating.
And that's what California did. So I didn't expect us to spend so much time on, on this lawsuit
That's
stuff.
all
I know,
right. It's
I know we've been going a little long, Cara. You had anything else we wanted to cover before we got through the day?
no, I just think that, Prop 50 in full swing in California, big race, hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on both sides. There are signs up on the freeway that say, mess with Texas. Yes, on Prop 50. You have Steve Hilton, who's also a candidate for governor in California, just put up a new ad this morning. He plays a clip of Newsom saying that he wants to, quote, punch these sons of bitches in the mouth, referring to Trump and MAGA. The ad is asking why Newsom is so angry. And it says because he'll never become president with his record of failure. So Prop 50 is definitely part of this national debate going on, right, between the Republicans and the Democrats. And it really just feels like the rest of us are kind of caught in the middle. And, none of this is doing anything to, in my opinion anyway, improve the health of our democracy and to keep all of us sort of sane. I don't know about you, but ever since Charlie Kirk was murdered, not very long ago at all, I've just had a really hard time just sort of being in this space. It's my job. I work in politics. This is my bread and butter. I love reform politics, but it just, everything I'm reading and everything I'm seeing, it's depressing. It's
The temperature's too high. I mean, even the folks that are out there passionately calling for, Prop 50 to invalidate the Independent Redistricting Commission even say, well, we don't really want to do it. It's like we've gotten a position where the state that is in debt is going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to do this on something they say we don't even really want to do. It's just a reaction to Texas of things that they're doing to their voters, right? And so it's like this big race to the bottom, unfortunately, and that's where we're at. But I think I want to shout out to Sean, our editor, who did a great job putting together, I think, a pretty fair independent guide to Proposition 50. And, I encourage everybody, especially if you're in California, to go take a look at it and make your own decision.
all right.
So I think we used up all our time for today, Cara. For those of you who are hanging around, thank you. You can always go to Independent Voter Project to support us. Go to ivn.us, where we cover these wonky issues of election reform and independent voter rights. And we appreciate everybody being here as usual. So,
Yeah, and we have no paywall. Go to ivn.us. We're also on Facebook. Oh, what we forgot to talk about is all the Facebook that happened this week, Chad. I mean, we
oh,
had a
man.
really active week. There was, I think we put up a question about should politicians get paid while the government is shut down? Yes or
Oh,
no?
yeah.
And something like 6,000 people.
6,000 comments and stuff. And then, we did post about the lawsuit too. There's some great comments in there and lots of comments even saying, no, primaries are for parties. And there's people saying, no, well, elections, there's a great discussion going on there. Right. And, I should try to jump in the comments myself a little bit, but it was actually very heartening to see because there's hundreds and hundreds of people expressing opinions, but they were good art, even ones I disagree with or say, hey, yeah, but have you thought about this? Like there's a very quality discussion. So I was heartened to see on the Facebook page, it's kind of, there's life, but it was also very contrary to what you see kind of elsewhere, where very divided people actually engaged in a discussion and an argument.
Yeah, I think the people who are participating are a pretty civilized bunch, and they are
Most of
respectful
the
of
time.
one another and following the etiquette, trying to follow the etiquette that we've set forth. And so yeah, that is really nice to see. And, you know, despite all the predictions that our democracy is, in peril, it's alive and well on Independent Voter Project's Facebook page for sure.
Well, let's watch the pendulum swing back. So,
All right.
all right.
Nice to
Well,
talk to
good.
you. Enjoy Brazil. We miss you. Come home safe and sound.
Muito obrigado. Tem bom dia. See you guys next week, and
See you
goodbye
next
again
week.
for real this time.
This is the Independent Voter Podcast, sponsored by the Independent Voter Project and produced by OLAS Media. Remember, you can always find the Independent Voter Podcast or the How It Really Works series at ivn.us. Follow and subscribe at olasmedia.com.
OLAS Media.